Let us pray. O God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight. You are strength and our Redeemer. Amen. I've always found that particular piece of scripture rather nasty. I've often wondered to myself, when Jesus was telling that parable, was he telling it calmly? Or was he in a moment of being ticked off with the disciples? We'll never know. You might wonder about the sermon title, A Table with 7,570,496,458 seats, where that may have came from. That was as of 2 o'clock, exactly 2 o'clock, not 2 o'clock and 1 second after, what the population of the world was at that moment in time. So it's obviously changed since then. In his book entitled Exploring Protestant Traditions, An Invitation to Theological Hospitality, theologian David Buskart recounts a conversation he had with his mother when he was about 10 years old. The gist of which was that whereas his buddies he was growing up with were Catholic, Presbyterian, and Methodist, his mother often described their family as just Christians. This succinct description had its merits, and it satisfied Buskart in some important ways for some time, but later he began to observe a troubling pattern among different denominations. Nearly every Christian tradition tried to occupy an ecclesiastical or spiritual high ground, writes Buskart. As the genuine descendants of Jesus Christ and the New Testament church, unlike, of course, all those other posers and wannabes. It's almost 2 years ago now. The town of Wittenberg in Germany celebrated the 500th anniversary of Martin Luther nailing his 95 Theses to the door of the church, thus kickstarting the Protestant Reformation. How was it, he asks Buskart, that a young monk at a new university in an obscure little town touched such a nerve as to convulse all of Europe and eventually the entire world? There is something a bit odd, I think, about celebrating World Communion Sunday today. Two things, really. First, it was born out of the ecumenical impulse of 1930s liberal Protestantism, when fascism was real and North Americans were really anxious. The day was meant to rally hope in the midst of uncertainty and to signal ecclesial unity in the midst of nationalistic divisions. World Communion Sunday was rooted in a theology of progress, the idea that with enough resolve and determination, the church could at least one Sunday in early October make visible its unity in the face of global strife. As our world has only increased in danger and uncertainty, World Communion Sunday is more popular than ever in some quarters, at least still today. The problem, though, is that unity is not so much a product of or reward for our earnest intentions in difficult times as it is a great gift. Sometimes we receive it badly or not at all, but it is nonetheless not our own creation. I'm going to step down here because every time I look down, I think I'm going to fall. Mark's Gospel this morning, this tidbit for World Communion Sunday, provides the perfect antidote, I think, for Christian one-upmanship, an oxymoron if ever there was one. Just after arguing about who among them was to be the greatest, and just before James and John asked Jesus for positions of glory, Mark writes that the disciples saw an anonymous healer casting out demons in his name. This person was unknown to them, and so was probably peripheral to the Jesus movement. He was not one of us, they complained. So we told him to stop, as if this healer needed their authorization as the sole proprietors of the mission of this Jesus. I have to tell you that I'm offended whenever the sacrament of communion becomes a weapon to punish and exclude rather than reconcile and include. When Roman Catholic politicians, for instance, are threatened and barred from the sacrament for differing from the Church's position on abortion, stem cell research, gay marriage, issues about which faithful Christians differ. I'm offended whenever Jesus' table becomes a barrier to keep away those who belong to a different denomination, who differ theologically, a symbol of exclusivism, a privilege for insiders, and not the radically inclusive meal that Jesus seems to have had in mind. In the Christian Century that I subscribe to, there was a report a couple of years ago on the 3 Seattle clergy. They were 3 interfaith groups. They called themselves the Interfaith Amigos. A Christian, Don McKenzie, a United Church of Christ minister, a Rabbi, Ted Falcon, and a Sufi Muslim, Jamal Rahman. They were good friends, and they hosted a weekly radio talk show. They would plan interfaith events, projects, celebrations, and conversations. They were a part of what Harvard University's Pluralism Project called a grassroots approach to interfaith relations. Instead of roundtable discussions, more and more Christians, Jews, and Muslims were working together and discovering a unity not based on theological agreement, but on shared values and hopes and commitments. In Seattle, among the 3 amigos, the boundaries sometimes would get blurred. And it was reported. Don McKenzie invited Rockman and Falcon to help serve the elements of communion at a service at University Congregational Church. He said it was deeply meaningful. And Rabbi Falcon said later that it felt like being on sacred ground. I myself can remember a similar experience I had back in the mid-90s in Toronto at a church that I served in working alongside a rabbi who I also co-led a Lenten study group with. Not everyone was happy. I will tell you this in truth. Not everyone was happy in the congregation that I served, that I was working alongside a rabbi. Letters to the editor of the Christian Century for the Amigos lamented the watering down of the sacrament when a Muslim and a Jew participated, and the failure that happened to focus on Christological distinctions. Not all Christians, after all, believe the same things about what happens at communion. It's perhaps why we will not and can't commune together. Roman Catholics believe the bread and wine become the body and the blood of Christ. Some believe Christ is present in the elements with bread and wine. The Presbyterian position, that's what that is. Some believe the elements are symbols of the body and blood. And some believe that we are doing, and what we are doing at communion is remembering the one called Jesus. These are significant differences on the basis of which wars have been fought. And Christian leaders have decided that something sacred would be violated and that it would be wrong to open the door too wide and risk including others. Jesus told a story once about a man who planned a dinner party and who invited guests, and they all declined for a variety of important reasons. Instead of canceling that dinner, the host ordered his servants to go out into the streets, you'll remember this story, and invite people who don't ordinarily get to attend fancy dinner parties. The poor, the blind, the lame. When they all found their way to the table, there was still room at that table. So the host sent the servants out again to compel people to come, he said, so that my house will be filled. What an amazing idea that is. The banquet table is open. It's not reserved for only those who have correct beliefs about food that's being served. It is not restricted to those who uphold some particular moral standard in life. It certainly is not restricted to those who espouse a particular ideology or political philosophy. This table, Jesus said, is radically open. All are welcome to it. This table, Jesus said, is precisely the place where all the boundaries that divide the human family, race, religion, political affiliation, tribe, geography, gender, sexual orientation, wealth or poverty, the table is precisely the place where all of that is transcended, where reconciliation happens. The point is not to exclude, but to include every single person until the house is full. Could it be that for all these years and all of these centuries we've been getting it wrong? That the guest list to this supper at table is far more inclusive than any one of us could ever imagine. Black, white, gay, straight, rich, poor, Christian, Jew, Muslim, Buddhist. Could it possibly be that Jesus at that time wanted everybody to be at the table? Yale's distinguished scholar of world religion, Lamin Sanneh, I think, says it best when he says, "I think so." Early Christianity, he says, unlike any other religion, broke out of the confines of geography and race. Christianity was a religion for all seasons, fit for all of humanity. So what about those who espouse other faiths? That's the sticking point. Surely this Jesus doesn't want them at the table unless, of course, they give up their beliefs and adopt ours. You think so? The great Jonathan Sacks says it best, the great British Christian chief rabbi, when he wrote these words: "Nothing has proved harder in the history of civilization than to see God in those whose language is not mine, whose skin is a different color, whose faith is not my faith, whose truth is not my truth, whose God is my God. Sachs goes on to say, but also the God of all of humankind. I wonder, can we affirm faith in Jesus Christ and seek to live according to some of his wisdom, and at the same time with and respect of neighbors who are not Christians? I think we can. We can consider alternatives. The alternative seems to be Christian exclusivism that resulted in marginalization over time and persecution of others. The Great Crusades, some of which I think still happen in the 21st century. I wonder why. Why would a God in whose image all of us are created, a creator where it says, at least in our text, is the lover of all creation, why would that kind of creator devise a plan that would automatically exclude all human beings who ever lived? Maybe we need to think about that. You see, this is not just an academic discussion among theologians, who we are called to be, and we are. Scholars of human history. The great Roman Catholic theologian Hans Kung, among them, says that peace among nations, peace among cultures, is inconceivable apart from peace among religions. A proposition proved with every suicide bombing, every Taliban assassination, every Jewish settler attack on Palestinian farmers, every incident of Christian arrogance and exclusivism. There is at the heart of our faith an alternative. The surprising news is that it's not our idea. It is not, as it is sometimes portrayed, a theological sellout, a liberal watering down of the sharp theological edges of the wisdom or the gospel of Jesus. It is, in fact, the essence of the gospel. The surprising news is that this is not just the Holy One's idea, it's something that was given birth from the beginning of time. It was the hope and dream for the humans that are all invited. That radical, gracious hospitality right at the center of things, that open-armed welcome to all the children of the universe to return home where they belong, where all of us belong, at the table. That beautiful, divine impatience that will not be satisfied until all the barriers and all of the boundaries are gone, and all are in the house, and the house is full. You know what? That will be the best supper of all. May it be so for you, and may it be so.